right, part 2 of your percent math lesson is going to involve changing decimals to fractions and then changing fractions to decimals. So we're going to talk about how to change them back and forth to represent the same value. So when you're changing a decimal to a fraction, you put a denominator of 100 under the tenths and the hundredths of your decimal. So here's some examples. I have 0.34 or 34 hundredths. All I need to do to change that into a fraction is put your 100 under the 34. You want to almost ignore the fact that there's a 0 and a decimal there. You're just taking the tenths and the hundredths and you're sticking them on top of 100 to change it into a fraction. So now it's a fraction, and don't forget you always want to do lowest terms. So 34 over 100, you know that you can make it smaller because they're both even. So I can definitely make it smaller at least by doing 2. Think about your 100 math facts. What can you divide into 100? 1, 2, 4, 5, 8, 12.5, 10, I forgot, and 12, and 20, and 25, 50, and 100. So what are those that I can divide into 34 that are also the same as I can divide into 100? So for 34, I've got 1, 2, 17, and 34. That's it. So I know I can use 2. 34 divided by 2, 17. 100 divided by 2 is 50. I know it's lowest terms because 17 is a prime number. I can only divide it by 1 and 17, and I cannot divide 50 by 17, so done. Here's another example of changing a decimal to a percent. So now I have a decimal of 0.9 or 9 tenths. Now I'm taking that and I'm still going to change it into a fraction with 100. So I'm still going to put 100 on the bottom, but what you want to keep in mind is I need something to go in the hundredths. So if I were going to rewrite this with 100ths, I just have to put a little 0 there as like a place marker. And then I take my 90 and I use that 90 instead of 9. What are you doing? There we go. So I've got my 90 over 100, and I do still need to do lowest terms. So what you want to think about is, when you're thinking about decimals, you've got the ones column, and then the tenths column, and then the hundredths column. Now, not all decimals are going to have a hundredth or a thousandth or whatever. So you may need to add some zeros. But you always want to make sure that it's these two that you're putting on the 100. All right, so 90 over 100 still needs to be lowest terms. 90 and 100 can both be divided by 10. This one's super easy. You're just looking, if they both have zeros at the back, you know that you can divide them by 10, and you end up with 9 over 10. All right. Just going to get rid of this. So last example, I've got 0.01 or 1/100th. Now think about that. You've got 1/100th, so of course that 1 is going to go on 100. And we don't need the 0, right? I could put a 0 there, but it doesn't change the value, so you don't need to have it. You just really want the 1, your 100 still stays on the bottom, And it's already lowest terms because you cannot make 1 any smaller. All right, so that's how you change decimals to fractions. Now we're going to do the opposite. We're going to flip it around. And we're going to change fractions to decimals. So when you're changing a fraction to a decimal, you find an equivalent fraction with 100 as the denominator, or you divide the denominator into the numerator. So I've got 4 over 10. Now this one, I can easily change that denominator into 100. So how do I change 10 into 100? I think about those math facts that I was just using. And I know that 10 times 10 is 100, so I have to do the 4 times 10. Whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So now I've got 40 over 100. 40 over 100 turns to 0.40. Now, do I need that extra 0 there? No, I don't. If the 100th column has a 0, I don't need it. Just like if the 10th column has a 0, I don't need it either. So, remember, when you're doing fractions to decimals, you just take the numerator and you stick 0 point in front of the numerator. So I had my 40, I put 0.40 because that's the numerator, and then I can take off the 0 if I need to want to. So that's how you change fractions to decimals. You just find an equivalent fraction with 100 at the bottom, and then you take the numerator. It's the numerator that's important. That's the thing that turns into your decimal. You put 0 point whatever the numerator is. Now if you look at our second example, this example cannot be turned into an equivalent fraction with 100 on the bottom. It has a 7. When you end up with this kind of example, this is where you have to use option 2. Option 2 is where you divide the denominator into the numerator. So I take that number and I divide, so 7 into 3. Now you can do long division for this, no problem. So you would go over and you would do an outside calculation, right? Where you would take your 7 and you would divide it into 3. So 7 goes into 3, it can't. 7 can't go into 3, so you put a 0 and a decimal and a decimal and a 0. And now 7 into 30. Can 7 go into 30? Yes, 4 times. So then I've got 28. And then don't forget to borrow. I've got 2 left over. I can keep dropping zeros. 7 into 20 goes twice. 14. Don't forget to borrow. All right, now I've got, if you notice, in my answer right here, I already have 2 decimal spots. That's enough. You do not have to go any farther than 2 decimal spots. So I know that 3 over 7 as a decimal is 0.42. Yes, it keeps going, but that's okay. For what we're doing today, 2 decimal spots is fine. So this is the 2 ways that you can change your fractions into your decimals. You can either find an equivalent fraction with 100 as the denominator, or you can divide the denominator into the numerator by using division and an outside calculation. If you really, really hate that, you can easily just use your calculator. Don't forget, when you're using your calculator, you only want the first 2 decimal spots, the tenths and the hundredths. Again, if you have any questions, don't forget, just get in touch.